On July 6, 1944, a fire destroyed the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus tent in Hartford, Connecticut, killing 167 people. Panic set in as flames spread rapidly through the crowded tent. But did one careless cigarette spark it all, or was it something more sinister? The scream wasn't just a sound, it was a physical blow, a collective gasp ripped from thousands of throats. One moment, the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus tent in Hartford, Connecticut, was a vibrant spectacle of color and sound, the crack of the whip, the roar of the crowd, the dizzying heights of the trapeze artists. The next, on that sweltering afternoon of July 6, 1944, a small flame licked up the side of the canvas. It began subtly, almost innocently, a tiny spark in the highest reaches of the main tent, near the menagerie entrance. But in mere seconds, it wasn't small anymore. A gasp turned into a ripple of unease, then a wave of shouts, and finally, a guttural, primal roar of terror. The canvas, treated with paraffin and gasoline to make it waterproof, didn't just burn, it exploded into a fiery torrent. A suffocating black smoke, thick with the stench of burning fabric and melting tar, descended from the big top, instantly obscuring the sun and plunging the joyous arena into a terrifying twilight. Heat, intense and immediate, seared the air, a physical force pushing people backward even as they tried to surge forward. Children, their faces still smeared with popcorn and wonder, were now gripped by a terror that transcended their comprehension. Parents frantically clutched at their loved ones, their eyes wide with disbelief and dawning horror. The exits, plentiful in theory, became bottlenecks of struggling humanity. The rush to escape, a stampede fueled by sheer panic, turned into a deadly crush. Seats collapsed, bleachers splintered, and the very ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble with the desperate energy of a crowd caught in an unimaginable inferno. The majestic, big top that had promised wonder now offered only a blazing tomb. In minutes, what had been a symbol of joy was a monument to catastrophic failure, a horrifying spectacle of fire and human desperation. But how many, amidst that blinding smoke and searing heat, would ever make it out? The summer sun beat down on Hartford, Connecticut, a familiar warmth that July day in 1944. But this wasn't just any summer. America was at war, entangled in the most devastating conflict the world had ever known. Overseas, the D-Day landings were a recent memory, and the Pacific raged with untold ferocity. On the home front, rationing was a way of life, and casualty lists were a constant, somber presence. For families grappling with the weight of global conflict, the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus offered a vital, enchanting escape. It was pure, unadulterated magic, a kaleidoscope of color and wonder against a backdrop of global gray. The greatest show on earth promised a spectacle unlike any other, and on this fateful Thursday, thousands flocked to the sprawling big top erected on Barber Street. Children, wide-eyed with anticipation, clutched their parents' hands, drawn by the distant calliope music and the promise of elephants, acrobats, and clowns. By midday, the vast tent was a buzzing hive of excitement. The air hung thick with the heady scent of sawdust, popcorn, and animal musk. Laughter echoed, vendors hawked their wares, and the grand parade of performers, glittering in their costumes, wound through the aisles, igniting gasps of awe. This was a day of precious normalcy, a brief reprieve from the anxieties of war. Families found their seats on the tiered wooden bleachers, craning their necks towards the three rings where the spectacle was about to begin. The lights dimmed, a palpable hush fell over the vast audience, and then, the familiar crescendo of the band swelled, signaling the start of the show. It was a moment of pure, collective joy, a shared dream unfolding under the canvas. But amidst the dazzling spectacle, high above the laughter and applause, an insidious danger lay in wait. Unseen, unheard, a tiny flicker had already begun its deadly dance, a silent predator stalking the joyous crowd. As the first acts commenced, the true nature of this unforgettable afternoon was about to be revealed, not in a roar of triumph, but in a scream of terror. What began as a dream of wonder was mere minutes from becoming a living nightmare, and no one inside that magnificent tent had any idea how quickly their world was about to burn. Beneath the vast expanse of the big top, a world of vibrant color and exhilarating danger unfolded. But this temporary cathedral of joy, a canvas city erected for a single afternoon, held a far more sinister secret. The Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus tent, a colossal structure designed to house thousands, was not merely a shelter from the elements, it was, by its very construction, a perfectly calibrated death trap. Its sheer scale was deceptive. A towering forest of poles, acres of heavy canvas stretched taut by an intricate web of ropes and guy wires, all contributed to an awe-inspiring spectacle. Yet, every square foot of that immense canvas skin had been treated with a waterproofing method that defied logic and invited catastrophe. To combat New England's unpredictable summer downpours, the tent fabric had been drenched in a mixture of paraffin wax dissolved in common gasoline. Not a fire retardant, but a highly volatile, highly flammable cocktail, sprayed liberally across every seam and fold. The very material meant to protect the audience from rain became a colossal tinderbox, an inverted fuel tank suspended over their heads, waiting for the slightest spark. Inside, the seating arrangement amplified the danger. Thousands of spectators, primarily women and children, packed tightly onto wooden grandstands and bleachers. Aisles were often narrow, some obstructed by concession hawkers or props, making rapid movement a near impossibility. Exit points, crucial lifelines in any emergency, were few and far between for such a massive structure, and often poorly marked or even blocked by vehicles and equipment. In an era predating modern fire safety regulations, the concept of clearly illuminated escape routes, emergency exits, or even basic crowd control protocols was alarmingly absent. There were no sprinklers, no fire alarms, no public address system to guide a panicked exodus. The show was a meticulously choreographed marvel of human and animal performance, but the environment itself was an unmitigated hazard. Every aspect of the Big Top's design, from its massive, flammable roof to its crowded, bottlenecked interior, conspired to create a terrifying vulnerability. But how did this highly combustible structure finally ignite, and what would it take for such a fire to rip through a space meant for dreams? Deep within the vast main tent, the afternoon sun, filtered through canvas, cast a dappled light on thousands of eager faces. Laughter and applause rippled through the air, momentarily drowning out the distant, uneasy growls from the menagerie. Children, wide-eyed and clutching their parents, watched in mesmerized silence as the star attraction, Gargantua the gorilla, was paraded before them, an imposing, magnificent beast that commanded every shred of attention. It was a spectacle of raw power and exotic wonder, the very heart of the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. But away from the spotlight, in the shadow of the menagerie tent, where the lions, tigers, and other wild animals were kept, a different kind of spectacle was quietly unfolding. Around 2:40 p.m., just as Gargantua's act reached its thrilling climax, a tiny, unassuming flame flickered to life. Eyewitnesses later described its origin point near the main entrance, adjacent to the wild animal cages, specifically near the west wall of the Big Top. It began low, a small, almost imperceptible spark on the canvas, perhaps fueled by discarded sawdust or dried grass. No one knows for certain its exact cause, but its devastating potential was immediate and absolute. Within seconds, the flame, initially no bigger than a matchstick, began to creep, then surge. The paraffin wax waterproofing, applied to the tent canvas, transformed the fabric into a terrifyingly efficient wick. What started as a whisper of smoke quickly became a hungry, orange tongue, licking its way upwards with horrifying speed. The circus, a world built on illusion, was about to face a stark, brutal reality. As the first wisps of dark smoke began to snake through the upper reaches of the Big Top, a few individuals, closer to the source, noticed the ominous glow. But in the midst of the thrilling animal act, how many truly registered the silent, swift destruction taking hold, high above their heads, before it was too late to escape its fiery embrace. The small flame, once a mere flicker, now roared with terrifying hunger, devouring the paraffin-waxed canvas faster than anyone could comprehend. In mere seconds, the illusion of safety shattered as the fire, fueled by the highly flammable waterproofing agent, raced upward, then outward, across the massive dome of the big top. A collective gasp turned to screams as molten tar dripped from the ceiling, searing skin, and the air grew thick with acrid, choking smoke. Panic, primal and absolute, erupted. The audience, moments before captivated, now surged as a single, terrified organism. Children were ripped from their parents' grasp in the surging human tide. Main exits, designed for orderly egress, became bottlenecks of terror, choked by a desperate, crushing stampede. People tripped and fell, trampled underfoot, their desperate cries swallowed by the roar of the blaze and the shrieks of the crowd. The fire, meanwhile, scaled the main pole with breathtaking speed, racing across the big top's vast ceiling, transforming the canvas into a fiery blanket that began to sag and collapse, raining burning debris onto the scrambling masses below. Amidst the chaos, incredible acts of courage unfolded. Fathers threw children over barricades. Strangers ripped through the burning canvas walls, creating makeshift escapes, pulling others to safety through the scorching gaps, risking their own lives in a desperate bid to save a fellow human. But for every hero, there were dozens trapped, disoriented by the smoke, dismembered by the crush, or simply overwhelmed by the relentless descent of the collapsing, burning inferno. Those who clawed their way out emerged into a world of unimaginable chaos, their clothes smoldering, their faces streaked with soot and tears, turning to watch their afternoon of joy morph into a monumental pyre. The big top, once a symbol of wonder, was now a funeral shroud of smoke and flame, its screams fading into the roar of the conflagration. But the escape from the immediate inferno was only the first battle. For many, the fight for survival was far from over. What awaited them outside the blazing tent was a scene of unimaginable horror, and a new test of human endurance. As the last embers cooled, a new, more profound horror settled over Hartford. The big top, once a symbol of joy, was now a charnel ground. The final tally would be a staggering 168 lives lost, countless others grievously injured. But the numbers, stark as they were, could never convey the true depth of the tragedy. So many were children, their laughter silenced forever. So many were mothers, their protective instincts futile against the raging inferno. The state armory, usually a site of parades and community gatherings, was hastily transformed into a makeshift morgue. Row upon row of bodies lay covered, waiting for loved ones to embark on the agonizing journey of identification. It was a task of unimaginable heartbreak, made brutally difficult by the fire's ferocity. Many victims were burned beyond recognition, their faces obscured, personal effects consumed by the flames. Families wandered the makeshift aisles, clutching photographs, searching for a familiar ring, a shoe, any small detail that could confirm the unthinkable. Among the nameless, one figure captured the city's collective grief, Little Miss 1565. She was a young girl, perhaps 6 or 7, found near the main entrance, her small body largely intact but her identity a haunting mystery. For weeks, her image was broadcast across the nation, a desperate plea for recognition. Who was this child? Why was no one claiming her? Her unknown fate became a poignant symbol of the fire's indiscriminate cruelty, a stark reminder that even in the face of immense documentation and investigation, some mysteries would linger, etched forever into the city's memory. The search for names, for closure, continued relentlessly. But for many, the scars of July 6, 1944, ran far deeper than the physical. The psychological wounds, the phantom limbs of lost family members, would haunt generations. And as the city grappled with its dead, an even more disturbing question began to surface: was this tragedy truly an accident?
Stop for a moment. Based on what you've just heard, what do you think really happened here? Drop your theory in the comments below. We read every single one.
Amidst the smoldering ruins and the lingering stench of burnt canvas and human despair, the grim task of identifying the dead slowly gave way to an equally urgent imperative: finding answers. Hartford was a city in shock, but beneath the grief, a fierce demand for justice began to simmer. The scene itself was a chaotic tableau of twisted metal, charred wood, and personal effects, each piece a silent witness to unimaginable horror. As the last embers cooled, the immediate focus shifted from rescue to investigation. Fire Marshal George O'Connor, a veteran investigator whose career had been defined by methodical deduction, arrived to lead a task force grappling with the unprecedented scale of destruction. The city, reeling from the loss, demanded to know how such an unthinkable tragedy could occur. Almost immediately, initial theories began to surface, swirling amidst the dust and despair. Was it a discarded cigarette, carelessly tossed into dry straw? Perhaps an electrical fault, a tragic mishap in the big top's temporary, often makeshift wiring? Each possibility was meticulously explored, yet none fully accounted for the fire's terrifying, almost instantaneous engulfment of the tent. The FBI, recognizing the national significance and potential implications of such a disaster during wartime, swiftly dispatched agents to assist. Their involvement escalated the investigation, adding resources and expertise, but also a new layer of intense scrutiny. The search for evidence became a painstaking, agonizing process. Every shard of glass, every scrap of burnt fabric, every bent nail was a potential clue, sifted from the ashes by weary hands, each discovery a fragment of a larger, terrifying puzzle. Investigators pored over survivor accounts, looking for consistencies, for any detail that could pinpoint an origin. They were not merely looking for a cause, they were hunting for explanations that could account for the sheer brutality of the event. But as they delved deeper, examining the unusual speed and ferocity of the blaze, a darker, more unsettling question began to emerge, whispered in hushed tones amongst the grim-faced officials: could this inferno have been an act of deliberate sabotage? Was someone responsible for unleashing this hell, turning a day of joy into America's deadliest big-top disaster, or was it a horrifying confluence of simple negligence and terrible circumstance? For years, the official conclusion hung heavy: accidental. But even as the dust settled and the families grieved, a gnawing question lingered in the shadows of Hartford's memory: what if it wasn't an accident? What if, amidst the chaos and the grief, a darker truth had been missed? Then, 6 years after the Inferno, a shocking development ripped through the quiet certainty. Not from the ashes of the big top, but from the sterile halls of a mental institution in Maryland. A young man, barely out of his teens, named Robert Dale Segee stepped forward with a chilling tale. He was known to some as Little Willie, and his confession was not just a twist in the tale, it was a dramatic, unsettling reopening of wounds thought long healed. In 1950, Segee claimed he had been the one, a boy of 14 back then, who ignited the canvas. His stories were vivid, disturbing, describing how he'd struck a match, watching the flames take hold, drawn to the destructive power, fascinated by the ensuing chaos. He spoke of a compulsion, a dark impulse that led him to set fires, a pattern that had landed him in institutions long before he ever spoke of Hartford. Segee's troubled past, marked by psychiatric evaluations and institutionalization, made his claims both compelling and deeply problematic. Was this the agonizing truth finally surfacing, a young pyromaniac confessing to the unthinkable? Or was it the troubled fantasy of a disturbed mind, seeking attention or grappling with inner demons? His account, delivered with unsettling clarity at times, yet riddled with inconsistencies at others, forced investigators to revisit every detail of that fateful day. It cast a long, dark shadow over the accepted narrative, suggesting an act of deliberate malice rather than tragic misfortune. But could such a profound confession, emerging so many years later from such a fragile source, truly be the answer to Hartford's enduring horror? The words had been spoken, the confession signed, yet a disquieting whisper began to spread through the halls of justice. Robert Segee, the young man who claimed to have ignited the Hartford Big Top, was far from a simple perpetrator. His mind, it would soon become chillingly clear, was a labyrinth of shadows and fractured realities. Born into hardship, his early life was marked by instability, culminating in a diagnosis that would forever define his credibility, a history of severe mental illness, including schizophrenia. Investigators, initially eager for a resolution, soon found themselves grappling with a bewildering array of shifting narratives. Segee's confessions were not a steady stream of facts, but a kaleidoscope of contradictions. Details about the fire's ignition point, the accelerant used, even his own presence at crucial moments, would morph and change with each retelling. One account described a match tossed carelessly, another, a deliberate act with a specific tool. The very canvas of his story seemed to shift beneath their feet, making it impossible to pin down a consistent truth. Psychological evaluations painted a picture of a deeply disturbed individual, prone to delusions and a desperate need for attention. Was this a genuine confession, or the elaborate fantasy of a troubled mind seeking a twisted form of recognition? Crucially, beyond Segee's own words, tangible corroborating evidence remained stubbornly absent. No witnesses placed him unequivocally at the scene of the ignition. No physical traces linked him definitively to the accelerant or the fire's origin. It was a case built almost entirely on the testimony of a man whose grip on reality was, at best, tenuous. The possibility of a false confession loomed large. Was he manipulated? Was he seeking notoriety, even if it meant punishment? Or was he simply so lost in his own mental landscape that the lines between truth and invention had blurred irrevocably? The Hartford community, still reeling from the tragedy, desperately wanted answers. But the man who offered them seemed to embody the very questions he was meant to resolve. Could they truly trust the words of little Willie? But for many, the neat package of Robert Segee's confession never quite settled the dust. Decades on, the official narrative of a troubled young arsonist still grapples with a persistent, unsettling question: was the true cause of the Hartford Circus fire ever truly found? Skeptics and armchair detectives alike found themselves returning to alternative theories, each seemingly more plausible than the shifting stories of Little Willie. Could the catastrophe have been a tragic accident, rather than a deliberate act of malice? The Big Top's temporary electrical grid was a spaghetti of wires, often hastily installed and under immense strain. With thousands of watts powering lights and attractions, and the sweltering July heat, faulty wiring or an overloaded circuit presented a compelling, if less dramatic, explanation. A spark, and the paraffin-coated canvas would have ignited with terrifying speed. And what about the simplest, most tragic possibility, a carelessly discarded cigarette? Amidst a crowd of thousands, beneath a tent treated with a highly flammable waterproofing mixture of paraffin and gasoline, it would have taken only a single, glowing ember. Investigators dismissed this, claiming the fire started too high up for a cigarette dropped from the ground. Yet, eyewitness accounts varied wildly, and the exact point of origin was never definitively agreed upon. Critics pointed to an investigation seemingly intent on finding an arsonist, rather than methodically disproving all other possibilities. The focus on Segee, some argue, created a tunnel vision that ignored equally viable, if less sensational, truths. His shifting stories, his young age, and the intense pressure under interrogation left a permanent stain of doubt on the official narrative. Could it have been the frayed insulation of a power cable, sparking in the stifling heat? Or a glowing ember from a cigarette, dropped onto the highly flammable canvas treated with paraffin and gasoline? Decades later, the official explanation feels less like a definitive answer and more like a convenient closure. Was the true culprit ever truly brought to light, or did the desperation for an explanation overshadow the truth, leaving the real origin of the Inferno forever shrouded in doubt? The ashes had barely cooled, the final victims identified, but in the stunned silence that followed the Hartford Circus fire, one question roared louder than the flames: who was to blame? The public, reeling from the incomprehensible tragedy, demanded accountability. Investigators swiftly turned their focus to the management of the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, alleging a catastrophic failure of responsibility that transcended mere accident. Charges of criminal negligence were filed, targeting those entrusted with public safety. General Manager James Haley, along with Treasurer George W. Smith, Assistant Manager Leonard A. Sussman, Chief Electrician Edward W. McLaughlin, and Head Properties Man William Curley stood accused. Their alleged crimes: failing to fireproof the canvas, ignoring critical safety warnings, and operating a tent that, for many, was nothing short of a death trap. Convictions followed, but the sentences were starkly disproportionate to the scale of human suffering. Haley received 2 to 5 years, the others less, a legal acknowledgement of guilt, yes, but a meager price for 168 lives lost and hundreds more forever scarred. Yet, the criminal proceedings were only the first chapter in a monumental legal battle. Thousands of civil lawsuits descended upon the circus, an unprecedented wave of claims demanding restitution for unimaginable pain and loss. The sheer volume threatened to bankrupt the legendary institution. In response, a groundbreaking compensation fund was established, a Herculean effort that would take years of meticulous negotiation and payout, largely funded by the circus itself. This pioneering model for victim restitution in mass casualty events would forever change how America responded to such disasters. The Hartford fire irrevocably altered the landscape of public entertainment. New fire codes, stricter safety regulations, and a heightened awareness of crowd control became the lasting, albeit tragic, legacy for every big top and public gathering across the nation. But even with convictions and compensation, did true justice ever fully settle upon Hartford? Or did the legal system, in its efforts to assign blame and offer solace, merely put a band-aid on a gaping wound, leaving deeper questions of responsibility and remembrance to linger, echoing in the smoke-filled air for generations to come? Yet, despite the swift convictions and Robert Segee's chilling confession, a shadow persists over the Hartford Circus fire. For many, the true Inferno of July 6, 1944, remains stubbornly unextinguished in the annals of American crime, its origin shrouded in a fog of doubt that time has only deepened. Was the troubled mind of little Willie truly capable of igniting such a catastrophe, or was he merely a convenient scapegoat, his disjointed narrative too readily accepted by authorities desperate for closure? The physical evidence linking Segee directly to the point of ignition was never entirely conclusive, relying heavily on his own fragmented, often contradictory, accounts. Investigators scoured the charred remains for definitive proof, yet beyond the coerced words of a confused young man, the smoking gun proved elusive. This enduring uncertainty doesn't just haunt the legal record, it echoes through the lives of those left behind. For every victim identified, painstakingly matched to a family, there were the nameless. The Little Miss 1565 and others, their faces forever unknown, their stories incomplete. How could such a monumental tragedy, witnessed by thousands, investigated by hundreds, still hold such profound secrets about its very genesis? The debate over Segee's guilt continues to ignite passions even today, fueled by archival documents, personal testimonies, and the gnawing question, if not him, then who? The justice system sought its answers, and punishments were meted out, yet the definitive identity of the perpetrator, the precise spark that doomed so many, remains a specter haunting Hartford. A stark reminder that some wounds, even after decades, refuse to heal, and some mysteries refuse to be buried. And so, as the decades turn, the whispers persist: was the real culprit ever brought to justice, or does the truth of America's deadliest big top disaster still await its final reveal? The smoke cleared, but the searing memory of that July afternoon in Hartford never truly dissipated. It etched itself into the nation's conscience, a grim testament to the catastrophic cost of negligence. From the ashes of the big top, an unyielding resolve emerged: such a tragedy must never happen again. This was the catalyst for sweeping fire safety reforms that fundamentally reshaped public gatherings across America. Immediately, the industry was forced to confront its dangerous practices. The flimsy, flammable canvas that became a death trap at Hartford was outlawed. New regulations mandated flame-retardant materials for all circus tents and temporary structures, a direct response to the horrific speed at which the Ringling tent ignited. Exit strategies, once an afterthought, became paramount. Clear, unobstructed pathways and adequate egress points were not just recommendations, but legal requirements, enforced with a newfound rigor that reverberated through state and municipal building codes nationwide. Every public venue, from auditoriums to sports arenas, felt the impact, forced to reevaluate their safety protocols, ensuring crowds could disperse quickly and safely. Yet, the legacy of Hartford extends beyond legislation. It lives in the quiet solemnity of memorials, like the one in Northwood Cemetery, where the unnamed victims finally found peace, their stones a perpetual reminder of lives tragically cut short. It is a story told to new generations, a stark lesson in vigilance, a powerful illustration of the human cost of complacency. The Hartford Circus fire taught us that safety is not a luxury, but a fundamental right, purchased at an agonizing price. The scars remain, not just on the landscape of memory, but on the fabric of our collective responsibility. But as we look at the precautions taken today, do we truly understand the depth of the lessons learned, or are we always one spark away from forgetting?
Before you go, if this story held your attention all the way to the end, hit the like button. It takes 1 second, and for a channel like ours, it genuinely makes a difference. Subscribe so you don't miss what we uncover next. Every week, another case the world couldn't close. And here's the part we mean most, the next story we dig into could come from you. Drop in the comments which unsolved mystery, disappearance, or disaster you want us to investigate. We read every single suggestion. The cases that stay with you are the ones we bring to life.